Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. A few days ago, Gareth at Books, Songs, and Other Magic posted a really marvelous video about religion, about his relationship to religion, and sundry thoughts upon the topic. He was prompted to do so from a handful of questions which he received from a student of his. And so these were sort of a springboard for thoughts on the topic. I loved the video when it came out. And then a day or so thereafter, Grix at Grix, etc., made a video responding to the same set of questions and also generalizing upon religion somewhat and his own unique experience. And that was a marvelous video as well. And most recently, Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads took up the task. And he is involved in a project right now where he is reading the founding scriptures of 5 of the great world religions, and then also some sort of novel that relates thereto. And it's very interesting. The whole project sounds interesting. And I believe he is wrapping up the Buddhist portion, but if you want to get in on the further installments, I will refer you to his channel. And in fact, I will put links to all of these videos in my description. Now, this is not a tag per se. This is just people responding to questions and responding in kind to thoughtful ponderings upon the topic of religion. And I thought I should do the same, although given the status of this channel, you can expect I'm going to be all over the map and probably not stick to the point. Some mention of poetry will probably come in there, and I will do the best I can. Now, I'm going to start by reading a little bit of something from Martin Buber, his book, I and Thou. And the I is an important aspect of the book. And I just want to read you a couple of paragraphs. Now, they are very long paragraphs, and I have not read this stuff for probably 45 years. But these 2 paragraphs stuck out in my mind, and I think they do not hold quite the sway over my imagination now, all these years later. But they are the one part from this book that I found very worthwhile. Otherwise, the book was fairly confusing. Perhaps I will put a timestamp in a comment so that if you want to skip this long preface by Martin Buber, you can do so. At times, the man, shuddering at the alienation between the I and the world, comes to reflect that something is to be done. As when in the grave night hour you lie racked by waking dreams, bulwarks have fallen away and the abyss is screaming. And note amid your torment, there is still life, if only I got through to it. But how? How? So is this man in the hours of reflection, shuddering, and aimlessly considering this and that. And perhaps away in the unloved knowledge of the depths within him, he really knows the direction of turning, leading through sacrifice. But he spurns this knowledge. Mysticism cannot resist the sun of electric light. He calls thought, in which he rightly has great confidence, to his aid. It shall make good everything for him again. It is, in truth, the high art of thought to paint a reliable picture of the world that is even worthy of belief. So this man says to his thought, "You see this thing stretched out here with the cruel eyes. Was it not my playfellow once? You know how it laughed at me then with these very eyes, and they had good in them then. And you see my wretched eye. I will confess to you it is empty, and whatever I do in myself as a result of experiencing and using does not fathom its emptiness. Will you make it up between me and it, so that it leaves off and I recover?" And thought, ready with its service and its art, paints with its well-known speed two rows of pictures, on the right wall and on the left. On the one there is, or rather there takes place, for the world pictures of thought are reliable cinematography, the universe. The tiny earth plunges from the whirling stars, tiny man from the teeming earth, and now history bears him further through the ages to rebuild persistently the anthill of the cultures which history crushes underfoot. Beneath the row of pictures is written, "One and all." On the other wall, there takes place the soul. A spinner is spinning the orbits of all stars and the life of all creation and the history of the universe. Everything is woven on one thread and is no longer called stars and creation and universe, but sensations and imaginings, or even experiences and conditions of the soul. And beneath the row of pictures is written, "One and all." Thenceforth, if ever the man shudders at the alienation, and the world strikes terror in his heart, he looks up to the right or left, just as it may chance, and sees a picture. There he sees that the I is embedded in the world, and that there is really no I at all. So the world can do nothing to the I, and he is put at ease. Or he sees that the world is embedded in the I, and that there is really no world at all. So the world can do nothing to the I, and he is put at ease. Another time, if the man shudders at the alienation, and the I strikes terror in his heart, he looks up and sees a picture. Which picture he sees does not matter. The empty I is stuffed full with the world, or the stream of the world flows over it, and he is put at ease. But a moment comes, and it is near, when the shuddering man looks up and sees both pictures in a flash together, and a deeper shudder seizes him. So, what is your religion and why? This is going to lead off into all kinds of tangents. So, the inevitable answer to that question for me, no other option, I believe, is possible. What is your religion? Christianity. Why? Well, there it gets biographical. So, and I'm going to tell you a lot. this may be of no interest to anybody. I suppose we first have to consider that there is a division between the idea of religion and spirituality, especially when we are young. We tend to make a great deal of that distinction. I don't know, for the purpose of this talk, how much I care for them to be considered separately. To be sure, I have never been religious very much at all. The idea of going to church or going to any communal place of worship and having blinders on so that I view the world exactly as my peers in some form of worship, well, that has never appealed to me. But some of it may be a desire for community, looking for a place to belong. Some of it may be just a desire for technical knowledge. Some of it may have been simply a desire for a certain kind of power. I've talked a little bit about my relationship to Tai Chi, how at a very young age I studied with Master Liao in Oak Park. Well, that's not the full story. Before Tai Chi, there is a backstory. Actually, it was while I was working at the movie theater, another co-worker there had a little bit of the same previous experience as I, and said, oh, there's this guy out in Oak Park teaching something called Tai Chi that's really weird. You should try it. You have to realize back in those days, nobody knew much about any of this stuff. Now everybody knows Tai Chi. So what was the experience, you ask? Well, I had taken a couple of classes in martial arts. I took judo and I think it was karate. At the university, we had some requirement for physical education. Now, I was a little bit under the standard age for university students, so I was probably 16 at the time. And I don't know if it was exactly at that period or slightly before or slightly after that I went and started taking Chung Mu Kwan, a Korean martial art. And it turned out that this establishment was part of a huge chain. It billed itself as a worldwide chain under the direction of Master John C. Kim. Now, it came out years later that the whole deal was a cult. And John C. Kim was under investigation for having bilked countless students out of millions of dollars. I know that sounds incredible. Not all religious cults are readily available. I thought it was a pretty good scam. Parents taking their children to what they think is a good leisure activity or exercise. And it turns out that the martial art where they are studying is a huge cult. From the get-go, I kind of picked up pretty quickly that something was not quite right, but I wanted to learn the skills, and by all appearances, the instructors seemed phenomenally skillful. They could do the single hand solar plexus thrust. Supposedly they could do it anywhere on your body or whatever, and even to the point of death, dim mak or whatever it's called. They did not use such a word at the time. This was a Korean martial art. And perhaps that was the draw. Perhaps it was the extra spiritual things. Now, the only one that really sticks out is that Master, and that was what everybody called Master John C. Kim. Master was able, one time he was going someplace and he accidentally left his keys inside the car or something, and so he just made his hand like water and was able to get the keys out. I don't know how making yours, and you know, there are like robots now that can do this kind of stuff. So it's not entirely implausible, but still, how the keys got out, I don't know. But and of course, he was said to have a gaggle of women just fawning over him wherever he went, and that may well be. I mean, he proved to have been quite a wealthy man with all of the money that he bilked from everybody. Now, I was in the cult at 2 stages, and the thing working against me, well, there were a couple of factors. One was that I tend to be skeptical and I tend not to believe things, but I wanted to believe. So, but those were always equally weighted in my mind until finally I made my final sayonara, my final adieu to the organization. And the first time I was there, and it just, like I said, something wasn't right. I mean, we were called upon, one was always daily being pressured to give money and to give money even in devious ways, I might say. Of course, you were pressured to sign up for the higher level course. I never did. I guess I had two things working in my favor. One was I was a bit of a cheapskate. For me, the little coins I had were hard earned, and the other thing was that being a poet, money was never really a primary focus of mine. You know, I worked one Christmas as a waiter at Marshall Field's, a big department store in Chicago, and there was one waiter named Greg, and he would be doing the tables, he'd be walking in, and he'd be serving the people out front, and then when he got in the back, he would say, "Gonna make that money, gonna make that money." Well, that was never, ever my attitude. That was the last thing I was interested in. I was just interested in making it through. So the preoccupation of all these instructors and presumably Master himself with money sent up a little warning flag for me. Nevertheless, I quit. I stopped coming. Other people had said that when they quit, they were pressured a lot. I was never given any pressure. But after I don't know, 5 months, 4 months, something, I have no precise recollection, I went back. And an interesting thing was Instructor Ernie. Now, he was not an instructor. He was a guy who had come in after I was there and was really a novice. He didn't know anything at all around the time I left. And after however long I had been away, 4 months, 5 months, whoa, he was an instructor. And one of the other instructors talked to me a little bit. And I really loved this instructor as a human being. And he voiced some of his concerns, although he did not let doubt enter into it. He said, this organization does not function by money. You are not promoted by money, for you as you earn your belt and stuff. It's based on the tests, based on blah, blah, blah. But he was a little bit disconcerted himself at how fast instructor Ernie had advanced. And it turned out, this guy said to me, he said, Instructor Ernie was heir to some kind of diamond fortune or something. I don't know what it was. And he was really into it. So eventually I left and washed my hands of the group. Some time ago, I saw some guy has published or self-published a book about the martial arts cult. I don't believe Kim ever served any time, and he died, I think, in his early 70s. After, when one organization went down, they would just change the name. And so the name of the martial art was variously. When I was there, it was Chung Mu Kwan, but it was named differently at different times. And it was the bones of it were always the same. It was composed of 8 martial arts, and it was the best martial art and everything. Now, I have not read this. I can't tell which is the front. I have not read this as yet because I suspect that this author has little quotes here and there that seem to come from right-wing sources. And we know people who are right-wing are a little bit unstable mentally. So I don't know about his judgment, but this author got in a lot more deeply than ever I did. As I say, I was always on the fringes. I was always torn between belief or the desire to believe and skepticism or even cynicism. Now, when I was young, I had a cousin who dragged us to a Baptist church in town. And I probably spent a year or 2 years doing that. In fact, I went to the Christian camp up in Michigan, Allegan, Michigan, I think. And really loved that activity. I also had a very good friend who was Jewish, and occasionally I would go with him to synagogue, and I would attend the services, the activities, all of that. It was very welcoming. And then even once I went with another friend to their church, which was a Methodist church. So as a boy, I had some exposure to various different religions or religious expressions in community. But I don't think I ever got any sense of spirituality from any of them, but I did from the cult. And after I had left that, spirituality was an interesting thing to me. I grew up in a house, my father was raised Roman Catholic, and he would have nothing to do with it. I believe he was an atheist, and he would have nothing to do with it. So we were raised without religious instruction, except for what my cousin dragged us into. And so spirituality intrigued me. And thereafter, it gets a little bit murky. The earliest that I recall was Muslim mysticism or Sufism. This book meant an awful lot to me, and I bought this as well. But this is really a marvelous book. I had it at some point, some sort of anthology of Zen Buddhism by, I don't know, Suzuki or somebody. And I think there were a couple of anecdotes, but none of the anecdotes were like this. Really, really marvelous stuff. So after the religious cult, the martial arts cult, I became a spiritual seeker, you might say. I also, incidentally, became aware of what philosophers refer to as the problem of evil. It was an interesting way to brush up against that. And also, at some point, my friend, my mentor, a woman named Marcia, who I met in poetry class, turned me on to Martin Buber. So there was I and Thou she was a big fan of. I got very little out of the book, but I liked those paragraphs that I read. And I have this book, which I probably should skip the story of how I came into possession of it. It does me little credit, although I was a bad young man. That's all I'm going to say. It rightfully does not belong to me. But I'm sure the possessor of it is long dead. And I can make no amends except perhaps to try to pay it forward in some kind of way. So any sort of spiritual inklings I had came through books. A momentous occasion for me, probably the most, was when I happened to come upon this book at the Chicago Public Library. We used to have a very good library, and you could just browse the shelves and find things like this. And I found it, I read it, and I investigated the publisher, and I got many other books. And had you asked me at any time for several years thereafter what my religion was, I would have said that I was Hindu. I would not have said that, but what faith I believed most suited to me, I would have said Hinduism, without a doubt. Now this is published by the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Center, and I recommend their especially Nikhilananda's translations. Swami Vivekananda was very important to me. They've got a big volume of his collected works, and they were all marvelous. And so I was there for a while, but of course I sought for spirituality in other things such as this, Musashi, because martial arts always have a spiritual, if you will, substratum, if not religious, indeed. I did study a bit of Tai Chi, which has as its basis Taoism. Now, Master Liao was always very careful to point out that the Taoism which he expounded upon in his classes was philosophical Taoism, not religious Taoism. There is a religion in China which is Taoism, and it's a little bit weird, but the philosophy behind it is not devoid of spirituality, of course. This is my favorite edition of the Tao Te Ching. I have not had any cause to search for another one for any time. Of course, I have not looked at this book very much. I've talked in another video about for Chinese philosophy, my preferred vehicle is the I Ching in the Richard Wilhelm translation. If you look into that, you have to ignore the stupid introduction by Carl Jung. So, I'll show you one more book. This is just a book taken from a hotel room somewhere. It's a nice book about Buddhism, bilingual, English and Japanese. I've only glanced at it. The reason I pull this one out is because I could not find my New Testament, which I was given by a friend in Taiwan. It was a bilingual New Testament, and that was the first time I had ever really read any of that stuff. And the figure of Jesus is, well, I don't think it's possible to defend oneself against it. One cannot be so hard-hearted as to dismiss Jesus, although people have been. And that was very early in Taipei. I remember in my room or in my bed or wherever I was, just pouring through that. And of course, I read the whole thing, the New Testament, but everything beyond the 4 Gospels seemed sort of needless to me, just as I don't really find the Bible itself, the Old Testament, to be all that needful. You really just want those 4 books. And I can't say I've read the Bible through, because I can't say I've read everything in the Old Testament, but recently I've heard somebody say, I think it was a video that Steve Donahue just put up. In fact, I'll link it if I remember. Somebody in the comments said that the God of the Old Testament is sort of immoral across all fronts. But Jesus himself is an interesting figure. And, you know, I should have brought my book Against Holy War to show, because on the back I got a blurb by Bishop Spong. And I think he was a bishop in the Church of England. And he was a bishop who disputes the resurrection and I think possibly even the virgin birth. Those, of course, would be things that I would be inclined not to believe in. So Jesus became an important figure to me around the year, I don't know, just around the turn of the millennium, I guess, when I was really writing and really focusing on writing. My neighbor was a woman of great spiritual weight, I would say. She was always rescuing animals. One time there was a bird down in a sewer by the L stop, and she went back and managed to save the bird. And she and I sometimes would get into escapades together where some dog was running loose in the neighborhood and we tried to corral it. That happened numerous times. But she was very spiritual, and I started going to church with her to, as it happens, the Church of England. I can't think of the name that we call them here. But at some point I decided that even though I would not voice the Nicene Creed because I didn't believe it, I felt that it was appropriate to make some sort of show of my cordiality with Jesus, that I wanted to make some display that I stood with Jesus and what Jesus represented. And so I was baptized, knowing that I would not hold to the letter in all of the creeds. Creeds are not of much interest to me. I was very pleased that at the baptismal font, the church cat happened to be there. So it was Father Johnson and the church cat. So that made the occasion very memorable. And he gave me because I was not, I just would pop up for services. I never got in line to get the wafer or whatever. I couldn't do that. And so I had just shown up sort of out of the blue, or I made an appointment, but he didn't know me from Adam, so to speak, but he was not going to turn me down. He just wanted to make sure I was serious and all of that. And then after the deed was done, he gave me a couple of books. He said, I want you to read this. One was a history of the church. So that's why I read the history of the church. My first introduction into all of that stuff. Next year, I hope to be reading AD 381, or whatever that book is, for Historathon 2024. I've done a video about that recently. And I've read other things dealing with church history somewhat, all of Gibbon, and all of that is confusing beyond all get all to me. All of the monophysitism and all of the different heresies and stuff. Well, I'm a Christian who probably holds less to the letter even than Bishop Spong. I don't know if that's called Unitarianism. I don't know. I really don't know all these religions. In my big book, The Resurgiad, I have a character who is some kind of priest. And he is, I believe, I have not looked at this thing since I wrote it in 2003. He is, I believe, secretly an atheist. And I would not put myself in his position. He is not me, but his lack of belief or what have you is probably nearer to mine than whatever is espoused by the Bishop of Canterbury. Now, where am I going with this? Well, poetry has to come in here at some point. For 50 years now, I have been a poet in the English language. Now, we are born and we are largely a matter of circumstance. Had I been born in a different place, English would not be the language I was speaking, but it was. And inherent to English is a whole slew of vocabulary. Words like God, words like Lord. Actually, grammatical forms or conjugations such as thee and thou. I've joked about how people don't like my pronouns. Well, when my first book, Sonnets, got one of the few reviews, the guy said, this guy just uses way too many these and thous. But of course, if you're talking to God, I don't know if a hey you or whatever will suffice. That was not what he said exactly, but I can't remember what it was. And so for me, what I have to say is I could not say that I use any of these terms dishonestly, but I don't have much belief or faith. I've never really seen much use for belief or faith in anything. I loved when I first read it long ago. I think it was the composer Bartók who said about Brahms, "What a great man, what a great soul, yet he believes nothing." And I have sort of patterned my life on that a little bit. I don't really see much utility in believing anything. But there's also the other aspect, which is that these words run real deep in the English language, and so they run real deep in the core of my being. I often think of the dialogue with Socrates. Somebody asks him, he asks somebody, do you believe in spirits? And I think the person doesn't. And he says, well, you call something spiritual. How can something be spiritual if there exist no spirits? And so my relationship with these words is a little bit like that. Now, when I was in that Christian camp, I was taught how to pray. And I engaged in prayer for a long time. At tough moments, it was incessant. And when I say prayer, I don't mean asking for this or that, other than asking thy will be done, if you will, which is the standard thing. But it kept me stable and kept me sane through some tough situations for a good duration. Of course, as with any of the trappings of religion, at some point they fall away. I remember Swami Vivekananda, I mentioned evil, saying at one point that while you believe in the distinction between good and evil, you have to act according to what is good. At some point, that distinction falls away, he said, but you still won't wind up doing something evil. It's a tough dichotomy, perhaps. But I do believe that it is like a finger pointing to the moon. Don't look at the finger, or you miss out on all that heavenly glory. All of these things are possibly pointing to something, and not a bearded man behind the curtain by any means. I'm going to reveal the tools of the trade. I'm retired from poetry. I can spill the secrets. There's a well-known quote by T.S. Eliot. Poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality, but an escape from personality. That can actually be taken further. Language is a self-contained system. I don't know what Buber was driving at in his book, but words provide a window, they provide a viewpoint or a perspective upon the world. The famous saying of René Magritte, the painter, "Ceci n'est pas un pipe," can actually be peeled back even further to "Ceci n'est pas ceci." The words don't actually hold meaning beyond the context which they themselves create. So, one of the reasons why when people read poetry, this actually was one of the first clues I had. It was a sonnet by Shakespeare that was in Western Wind, the John Frederick Nimm's textbook that we used. And I can't remember which one, and I can't remember the reaction, but my friend said, "Oh, this is an amazing sonnet about revulsion." I don't know what it was. And I thought, because I thought it was the most amazing sonnet about, I don't know, despair. I don't remember what it was, but the incongruity puzzled me. And that ultimately is because when the poet weaves his poems together, he is using words without meaning, devoid of meaning. It is incumbent upon the reader to supply the meaning to the words which a poet has formed into a poem. And so, hence, the great variety of interpretation that people can bring to poetry. So I've gone on further than I needed to with that. Needless to say, these words run deep within me, within my soul. If I had been born any place else speaking a different language, it might have been different. The great American poet Claude McKay, he was Jamaican born, but he came into his own here. He himself acknowledged he became Roman Catholic at the end, and his relationship to the religion was probably not so different to my own. If anything, I patterned myself upon him in this regard. He felt that Roman Catholicism was the only force capable of standing up to communism. But he, somewhere or other, I believe, acknowledged that between Christianity and the religion known as Islam, he could have gone either way, possibly. It was just sort of chance that made him go the way he did. And he did go that way. He did choose Roman Catholicism. So that was sort of the choice I made. But I am very well aware that my path could have gone a different route. If you get into Vedanta, if you read the Upanishads, you come to realize that there are different paths which people take. Everything is within the context of the words used to express it. In the I think it was that book on the Hasidism. Buber has a thing about one of these linguistic puzzles, how you can say the God of Adam, of Abraham, and of Isaac. And I can't remember, but he explains how nuanced all of this is. And so I am one of these Christians who, for my own purposes, interpret the words as I like and as I choose. The other, I suppose, aspect that I should bring into this is that these words hint at realities which are not so readily accessible. The reason that I liked that Martin Buber couple of paragraphs that I read was this notion. First, you've got one interpretation or one idea on one wall and one on the other wall, and you see this or you see that, and then all of a sudden there comes a day when suddenly you see both of them together, and you shudder. Well, things like that do happen, and that's one way of describing something. There are multiple ways of describing these sort of extraordinary occurrences. You might refer to what you have seen as the imperishable Brahman. And then you begin to notice signs of things here and there. So, I am a Christian, and I think for me, the equivalent to Claude McKay's reasoning, he felt that communism needed a counter-opposing force. I have not been oblivious to what has happened to Christianity in my country and the mockery that all of these hypocrites have made of the words of Jesus. And so that was why I decided to, in 1996, perhaps, 1998, whatever year my book, The Soul's Refinement, was initially written, copyrighted, I decided to make my affirmation for Jesus. Now, that's a long time ago, and I have continued to evolve and to expand my views, and so I would bet that my thinking is probably not all that far from Gareth, or Gareth's, although I would not call myself an atheist. I still would adhere to the commitment that I made, if you will, when I write a poem. In fact, the one that I just put up, do I have it here? No, I don't. What was it called? The Siege of Amalek. I started it with Heavenly Lord. If you were to enter every poem I wrote in my life and did an alphabetical index of first lines, the numbers that started with Heavenly Lord or Heavenly God or whatever, they would fill the world, as it were. There's just an awful lot of them because an awful lot of my poems are structured in the form of a prayer. I say that as a person who very seldom takes recourse to that activity. It's not so much a every man in a foxhole believes in God. That's kind of a stupid argument. But because I am in English, when I am striving for clarity, the language and the vocabulary available to me is an immense help. Do you think religion has a positive or negative effect on society? Yes. I don't mean to be flippant, so there's untold examples of positives and negatives derived from religion, and I think it was Greg in his video said that the negative ones most obviously outweigh the positive ones, and it is hard to dispute that for sure. Regardless, this is the world we are in. In English, this is the language that we are using. There is no beating around that bush. You know, in one of Swami Nikalananda's books, he talked about the problem with religious texts. Even as with, T.S. Eliot, he said something once 50 years before, and then everybody holds that to be the immutable truth, the unchanging, forever and ever, amen, immutable truth. And even the words of Scripture are not so. And in one of his books, and it might be the one on Hinduism, he talks about, and I wanted to use this actually as a quote in my book, Soul's Refinement, and I don't know if I did and just forgot to include it in the printed version, or if I just ran out of space and was not able to, but it's a very nice passage, which I did not bother to hunt for this, but he explained that all of these religious constructs, it's like the clock. And the clock does not document exactly the time which we perceive according to the sun. And so we are all aware that every 4 years, an extra day has to be stuck into the calendar, leap year, to make up for that. But beyond that, the clock is always wrong. Every year it is wrong, even with that extra day stuck in. It's wrong. It can't be accurate. It's at best an approximation, and it's a useful thing for all of us to have this sort of measurement. And that is what these religious scriptures are. They constantly have to be recalibrated according to the divine reality, if you will. And for that, prophets arise and so forth. But I would say it does not have to be nearly so dramatic as that. It just requires sort of a liberal mind. You have to just approach the texts without those mind-forged manacles so many are wont to don. You have to think about what is written and consider what might the original framers of the text have been striving for. The world has changed considerably. So even a little bit of philosophy might be helpful sometimes. Do you think stories are important? Yeah, I do. It's not really a thing that I place much store by as it is used in our world today. If you're in the arts, everybody talks about, oh, this is the story. Such and such an artist talks about the story of, being an immigrant and blah 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 or whatever. And as far as art goes, I don't think the idea of story is that important. So Shakespeare's plays, yeah, they're stories, but they're more than stories. If you just read the story, you don't have Shakespeare. So art is something different to a story. So as the word has been popularized today, I don't think too much of stories. Everybody feels that they have a story they want to tell, and we all have stories. And most of our stories are not all that significant or interesting. Speaking as a writer, I think Kipling pointed out that most writers really are the least interesting of persons. Now, there are some who become writers because something real interesting happened to them. But so that type of story, no. But as far as this lore of story, which contributes to human culture, I think they are indispensable. And they all, I think, derive from religion, largely, whether it's the Greek gods that fill the literary allusions of John Keats, or the biblical ones from other poets. I mean, I have fortunately been able to recycle some of the biblical allusions from other poets. So when Robert Frost, for instance, mentioned Abishag, I was able to find that. I have a Bible where it's real easy to look things up, and then I could read that and find out what he was talking about. And that's sort of the way mostly I read the Bible. I mean, I read chunks here and there, just out of interest. But these names, these stories form the common idiom. And as more cultures get assimilated into any given I don't know what the right word is, any given, as more cultures get, let's just say culture, then the wealth of material expands. Obviously, some things are lost. But this, as the world has become the global village, all of these things, we have a lot more knowledge now of certain important figures in Chinese history, as any person in China would of Western history. And they become useful tools for at least any contemporary poet in interpreting his present day reality. Mahmud Darwish, I don't believe he subscribed to any set of religious beliefs, but he drew on them all. And yeah, he was, if anything, in spirit, a Muslim. Abu Nuwas, I'm not so sure about. Is there a particular story that has had an impact on your life? I would say probably the one of David and Goliath, because my name ultimately derives from him, and the story of a young boy facing a gigantic, opprobrious foe resonated with me. At one point, I remember in my life when I realized that it was not that the hand of God came down and guided David's little stone from his sling. No, it was that the real moment of truth there was when David said, I'm not going to put on that armor. He had a bit of insight, perhaps delivered from some otherworldly source of inspiration, perhaps from God, that putting on that cumbersome, restrictive armor was not the thing to do. He was smart and he heeded his instinct or his inspiration, whatever it was. And so he was a fairly good role model for me at some point. The whole rest of his story, maybe not so much. Do you identify with that character? Well, I did for some time, I would say. But as, you know, I did not just rewatch all the videos before making this of Gareth and Grix and Greg, the three Gs. So I can't remember in detail. I wish I had, but I'm just sort of pressed for time. Now I forget what I was going to say. So I said, do I identify with that character? Well, I did. Oh yeah, as I think it was Gareth who said, I can probably identify with most anybody. That's part of the job of being a poet and being a playwright. That's, of course, something that you have to learn to do a little bit. We have notorious examples in the public sphere of people who have proven incapable of doing that. Well, did I miss anything that I needed to say? Unquestionably, I don't think I did. So it's for me, it's back to these two, and back to Willa Cather, O Pioneers, which has slipped in there. I'm trying to finish all three. It would be nice by the end of the year, but I'm not really hopeful in that regards. I hope I have done a satisfactory job of answering those questions and talking about the subject of religion a little bit. I really think that this students' questions opened up a marvelous opportunity for people to talk about these things. It is not a tag, and nobody is required to do this or asked to do this. But anybody who does take it upon themselves to do, I wish you would tag me or something so that your video will come to my attention. I would be most interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.